Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The port strike in BC continues. Political reporter Brian Lilly explains how much damage this walkout is causing the Canadian economy. Just prior to leaving for the Premier's meeting in Winnipeg, Premier Daniel Smith took a few shots at Ottawa during the Premier's pancake breakfast at the Stampede. And high-speed internet will be coming to more rural homes in Alberta thanks to a new deal signed between the province and Ottawa.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The BC port strike continues with no end in sight. Another round of bargaining was held over the weekend, but no deal was reached, and it is unclear if more talks are planned. Around 7,400 members of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union Canada have been on strike since Canada Day, idling all cargo handling out of the Port of Vancouver, which is Canada's busiest harbour. Maritime employers now say U.S. port workers refusing to handle containers rerouted from Vancouver is damaging the competitiveness of ports along the West Coast. Jurisdiction over maintenance, automation, along with improved wages and language to prevent contracting out are some of the key issues in the dispute. Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly weighed in on the BC port strike and offered his thoughts on if the Trudeau government will be willing to bring in back-to-work legislation to get Canadian cargo moving again.
There was that Supreme Court decision a few years ago that said the right to strike is a charter right. That was never written into the charter. It was never read into the charter. There were decades of precedent previously saying that this was not something that was a charter protected right. And the court invented it. They said its time has come, I believe was the phrase that the justice who wrote that decision used. So you can't use back to work legislation anymore. And the couple of times it has been used since, it has been struck down by courts as unconstitutional.
Political reporter Brian Lilly will have more on the BC port strike, along with details of how 6 polls now all say that CPC leader Pierre Poilievre is leading Justin Trudeau in popularity across Canada. That's coming up in the second half of our program. Canada's Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair announced more help for non-governmental agencies, or NGOs, in the response to large-scale emergency events, including many of the wildfires our country has been dealing with. Officials say there are currently 900 wildfires still burning in Canada, with almost half of them being out of control. Blair says humanitarian agencies have played a key role in helping Canadians during these very difficult times. He says Ottawa will provide an additional $82 million in new funding to help a number of agencies.
The funding from this program will help these organizations recruit and maintain a highly skilled and qualified group of workers who can rapidly deploy on short notice to support the response to emergency situations. It will also allow them to train new personnel, to purchase equipment and supplies, and to adapt protocols and procedures to address the needs of specific communities. With today's announcement, the Government of Canada has provided a total of $166.9 million in funding under this program to help the non-government organizations respond to disasters and to serve their fellow Canadians in crisis.
Pray for more rain all across this country. Well, here in southwestern Alberta, we saw some more rain today. Jeanette Rocher is back from her holidays and has an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, the moisture has been a welcome sight for many of our farmers, but a weather advisory was issued by Environment Canada whereby we could see more thunderstorms and even the potential of funnel clouds.
Yeah, we do have a weather advisory, like you said, Hal, specifying that conditions are favorable for thunderstorms to produce some funnel clouds, and that could last into this evening. Now, in addition, tonight, we're also looking at a 30% chance of showers and a risk of a thunderstorm, as well as winds kicking up from 30 to 50 kilometers per hour. Now, as we get into tomorrow, Wednesday, not quite as bad, looking at a mix of sun and cloud. Should be a fairly nice day, looking at a high of 26 degrees, a humidex at 28, and wind at only 20 kilometers per hour. So it should be a very nice day on Wednesday. And Hal, I will be back later in the show to give you that 7-day forecast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. 6 people were killed after a helicopter crashed in Nepal. The Manang air helicopter was carrying 5 Mexican passengers and a pilot from Nepal. Emergency officials say the chopper was heading to Mount Everest when it went down. The helicopter lost contact around 10:13 in the morning local time on Tuesday and was found a short time later. All 6 bodies were located and brought back to Kathmandu. Officials say the cause of the crash has not yet been determined. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says it's very important that like-minded democracies stick together in the face of Russian aggression. Trudeau highlighted Canada's decision last year to set up an embassy in Lithuania, which is now hosting a gathering of NATO leaders.
You are a Baltic country, a democracy within close proximity to Russia. You understand the realities of the current security environment in Europe better than most. I very much appreciated hearing your perspective and also strengthening the bilateral relationship between our two countries. Earlier this afternoon, I was in Latvia at Camp Adadsi, where Canada announced that we are more than doubling our current troop deployment to enhanced forward presence Latvia. This will make a significant contribution to NATO readiness in the region and helps us achieve the commitment we made at the Madrid NATO summit last year to scale up EFP Latvia to a brigade to continue to deter Russian aggression across the Baltics.
The interim leader of the Assembly of First Nations spoke before hundreds gathered for an annual meeting in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Joanna Bernard addressed the chiefs for the first time since the dramatic removal of Roseanne Archibald as national chief.
I want to highlight the importance of the Assembly as a space for collaboration, unity, and empowerment. It is through open dialogue, the sharing of knowledge, and the sharing our diverse perspectives that we can address the challenges we face and work towards a better future for all nations, all First Nations. A future that reflects our values, respects our traditions, and honors the sacred bonds we share with our lands, waters, and ancestors.
Former National Chief Archibald was removed from her position on June 28th following an investigation which says she was accused of workplace harassment and a toxic work environment. 2 people are in hospital with serious injuries following a shooting in downtown Toronto. Police say it could have been the result of road rage following reports of street racing. Police arrived on scene to find 2 people who had been shot, and both were taken to hospital.
When officers responded and attended the scene, they located 2 victims suffering from gunshot wounds, a male and a female victim, both in their 20s. Immediate aid was given to the victims by officers along with emergency medical services, and both victims were transported to nearby trauma centers where they are currently being treated and listed to be in serious but non-life-threatening condition. The investigation itself is currently active and ongoing and still very early stages of the investigation.
The federal government is teaming up with the Alberta government to help improve internet access for Albertans in rural communities. The agreement is to invest more than $96 million to help connect more than 10,000 homes across the province with high-speed internet. Officials say that includes more than 2,000 Indigenous households and more than 40 rural communities across Alberta. The province's construction work has already begun in 26 communities, with others soon to follow. Some of those communities include Vulcan, Rimbey, Rainbow Lake, Champion, Brockett, and Carmen Gay. The province also says it is beefing up access to capital for our province's livestock producers. Officials say changes to the Feeders Association's guarantee regulation will give members more options to purchase and market livestock while generating better cash flow for their operations. The changes raise individual and joint membership loan limits, excluding advances, from $2 to $3 million. Cattle prices have increased 25% since the start of the year and are expected to keep rising. The province's livestock producers are in greater need of easily accessible low-interest capital backed by a government guarantee. Just prior to heading out to the Premier's meeting in Winnipeg, Alberta Premier Daniel Smith took a few shots at Justin Trudeau and his government during the Premier's pancake breakfast at the Calgary Stampede on Monday. Smith says Ottawa needs to improve on their own areas of jurisdiction and to leave Alberta alone.
I would like for the federal government to focus on their areas of jurisdiction and do it well. How about we see them address the issue of out-of-control monetary policy so that we don't have an inflation crisis any longer? How about they meet their commitments internationally on defense spending so that we can continue to be part of a full partner in the NATO alliance? How about they manage our passport offices and our airports and our port system? And how about they support Indigenous health so that we're dealing with the opioid crisis? They've got lots else on their plate in their areas of jurisdiction. They should stop trying to interfere in ours, and they should start doing their job, is my view. And I think all the other premiers feel the same. So I've pushed back. I've seen Saskatchewan push back, and I think you'll see increasingly the other provinces will push back as well.
Lethbridge City Council voted in favor of a number of funding allocations on Tuesday to help support the Community Social Development Team. Some of the money includes up to $200,000 of federal Reaching Home funding to be used to hire a consultant to complete a needs assessment. Members of council also talked about another $90,000 that can be used to help support the Wellness Shelter and Stabilization Unit project.
The cost for this work is $90,000 annually, with the ability to renew up to 3 times should the service provider meet contractual expectations and the federal Reaching Home funding continue to be available. So we're looking at $90,000 annually for a position to work within the shelter and get people connected to housing services.
So this is for an individualized position that we're going to pay somebody with benefits, presumably, on a full-time position or a contract position, $90,000 a year to do this?
It includes a position as well as other programming costs and contracted services.
Mods adds that they'll continue to advocate to get the services that we need here in Lethbridge. A former coach with the Lethbridge Gymnastics Academy was back in court on Monday. Jamie Ellicott was previously charged with the sexual assault of several young girls last year. Ellicott recently fired his lawyer and is still searching for a new one to replace him. He was expected to hire Calgary lawyer Tony Rolston, but said he's been unable to come up with a retainer. He has since been approved for legal aid and is expected to have a lawyer assigned to him by the end of the week. Ellicott faces 5 counts each of sexual interference and sexual assault of a person under the age of 16. He'll be back in court on July 24th to confirm that he's hired a new lawyer. Officials with the Lethbridge International Air Show say they're looking for volunteers for the end of the month for the 2-day show. Around 125 to 150 volunteers are desperately needed, which would include those helping out with security or looking after chalets. Dallas Hardy, president for the Air Show, talks about the importance of having those helping hands.
A 2-day show running from basically 8 a.m. in the morning till 6 o'clock at night. You need quite an array of volunteers, and without the volunteers, obviously we couldn't do the show. The volunteers are a huge part of this, and right now our biggest need for volunteers is for setup. We actually start setting up at the airport on the 24th, and we need some help from volunteers for setting up fence, moving our equipment onto airside.
The Lethbridge International Air Show takes place July 29th and 30th at the airport. It's always a great time. An Australian man is doing the near impossible, and all through the power of his bicycle. Michael Woody has embarked on a cross-Canada journey to visit Commonwealth war grave sites across Canada. What's even more spectacular is that he has a plan to visit 25,630 cemetery sites around the world. BCN's Micah Quinn caught up with Woody near Bow Island, Alberta, to hear his incredible story.
Come on, take over.
Around 10 years ago, Michael Whitty was going through hard times, dealing with being homeless and sleeping rough through the Welsh winter. He then rediscovered his grandfather's 1916 war diary, which helped spark the idea to go on the global bike trip. After that, the Australian began his adventure in November of 2015 and says he will wrap up his expedition by August of 2045.
I hope to still be alive at 80, so if I wasn't doing this, you have to fill your time doing something. So if people are amazed that I plan to be cycling around the world for the next 20, 30 years, like all of us, we've got to do something.
Whitty says he considers it a great honor to pay tribute to veterans who laid down their lives for the freedoms we all enjoy today.
I always, in the back of my mind, that and they may never have been visited in the last 60 or 80 years that they've been lying there. I'm photographing every Australian soldier's headstone individually. So for my map of the cemeteries I'm visiting, I'm taking a photograph of my bicycle and at least one of the headstones.
To follow the Australian's progress, you can check out his Facebook page. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
See you later, buddy.
Wow, what an incredible journey. Wishing Mr. Whitty all the best. We received some much more needed moisture here in many regions of southwestern Alberta. Another thunderstorm along with the potential of funnel clouds are in the forecast. Have a look at the weather pictures coming up. We saw more clouds and showers again today in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is in now from her holidays and has a full look at the weather picture. Jeanette, some of that moisture that our farmers have been receiving may be sticking around a little while longer. Not only could we see another thunderstorm, but according to Environment Canada, there's a risk of funnel clouds developing as well?
Yes, that's correct. We do have a weather advisory, Hal, and that is stating that conditions are favorable for thunderstorms this evening to produce those funnel clouds. So in addition, we're looking at a 30% chance of showers and the risk of a thunderstorm, as well as winds 30 to 50K. Okay, so as we get into Wednesday, though, much different story. We're looking at only 20 km/h winds, high of 26, and a humidex of 28. Should be a lovely day, mix of sun and cloud there. Into Thursday, that's where we could see some rain. Again, looking at a 30% chance. 25 is the high, 26 for a high on Friday. Could see the possibility of some showers Friday evening, though. But then as we get into Saturday, clear skies again, high of 29, and that 29 should stay right through the rest of the weekend into Sunday and Monday. As we look at the average high for this time of year, 25, average low 10 degrees, 35 for a high. That was the record high actually back in 2002, and in 1997 we had the record low, which was only 3 degrees. That's really cold for July. Sunrise this morning at 5:36, sunset this evening at 9:37. We're looking at 16 hours and 1 minute of daylight. Okay, as we look to the west coast, we're looking at clouds and then clearing in both Victoria and Vancouver. Victoria looking at a high of 21 degrees, but Wanda-Fuca Strait looking at 17 degrees, 22 for a high in Vancouver. Edmonton could see a 60% chance of showers and risk of thunderstorms in the afternoon. Also some local smoke there, 23 for a high there. Calgary, there's a weather advisory in effect this evening as well. Same thing as the Lethbridge one, looking at thunderstorms that could produce those funnel clouds. But into tomorrow, they're looking at sun and cloud in the morning, then getting more cloudy as the afternoon progresses. Could see a risk of a thunderstorm by the afternoon there, and a 30K wind as well. High of 21. Good for those of us to know who are heading out to Stampede on Wednesday, like me. Okay, 23 for a high in Saskatoon with mainly clear skies there. Beautiful, mainly sunny day in Regina as well. High of 22 degrees. High of 23 in Winnipeg with a mix of sun and cloud. Pretty even, Steven, across the prairies there, I would say. As we get to central Canada, though, we are looking at, actually there's a weather advisory in effect for both Toronto and Ottawa. Could see 90K winds. Could see the possibility of some funnel clouds as well, and thunderstorm watch, as well as possibility of some hail from nickel size all the way up to ping pong ball size. That's happening tonight, Ottawa and Toronto, but tomorrow, different story. Sunshine, mainly sunny skies in both of those cities. Toronto, high of 27, mix of sun and cloud. All three of those cities also looking at very high humidexes as well, so very humid conditions. Same thing for the East Coast, looking at fairly warmer conditions, especially in Fredericton, 27 for a high humidex. Looking at afternoon thunderstorms there, Halifax, mix of sun and cloud. A fog retreating into the coast in the morning, 27 for a high there. 24 is the high expected tomorrow in Charlottetown. Could see some showers and some onshore drizzle expected in St. John's, but otherwise mainly cloudy conditions tomorrow, 15 for a high there. So there you have it. That's your forecast.
The Canadian Federation of Independent Business wants Ottawa to once again extend the deadline for small businesses to repay pandemic support loans. The deadline for around 900,000 businesses and nonprofit agencies to repay interest-free loans through the Canada Emergency Business Account Program was extended last year to the end of December. The group claims around 20% of businesses are at risk of shutting down without an extension. A federal court judge says the U.S. government failed to show that Microsoft's proposed $69 billion takeover of video game company Activision Blizzard will lessen competition. The judge ruled that the evidence points to more consumer access to Call of Duty and other Activision content. During a hearing last month, CEOs from Activision and Microsoft pledged to keep Activision's blockbuster game Call of Duty available to people who play it on consoles, including Sony's PlayStation, that competes with Microsoft's Xbox. Business owners are taking more of an interest in seeing that youth in Alberta receive a quality education. That's according to Michael Van Pelt, who's the president and CEO of the think tank Cardus. Van Pelt says business owners are looking for and needing more qualified and reliable employees to help them flourish.
You as a business leader wake up in the morning and what kind of skills are you concerned about? Yes, you're concerned about a labor shortage in Canada. but you're also concerned about a skill shortage. Okay, what is that skill shortage? Here's what it is. It's numeracy rates. It is literacy rates. It is soft skills. It is emotional capacity. When you actually think about those skills, those are not skills that you learn in a post-secondary environment. Those are skills that you are being taught, and behaviors and character that is developing really in a K-12 environment. The way you will get at this answer is actually focusing your concerns and challenging K-12 education to up their game, to perform at a higher level and help build some of those missing skills that employers are thinking about.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Michael Van Pelt from Cardis and BCN's Naveen Day coming up after Business News. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 56 points on the day to finish at 19,878. The Dow was up 317 points to 34,261. The S&P 500 was up 29 on the day to 4439. And the Nasdaq was up 75 points to 13,760. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.79 to $74.78 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 6 cents to $2.73 U.S. Gold was up $6.72 on the day to $19.32.08 U.S. an ounce, and silver was down a cent to $23.12 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.40 per bushel, barley's at $9.32, canola's at $17.49, and corn is at $9.98 per bushel. Live cattle August contract was up $1.63 to $178.83. Feeder cattle August contract was up 90 cents to $247.15, and lean hogs were up $2.48 to $101.28. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 75.56 U.S. Recapping one of our top stories, the Alberta government is teaming up with the federal government to help improve internet access for Albertans in rural communities. The agreement is to invest more than $96 million to help connect more than 10,000 homes across the province to high-speed internet. Officials say that will include more than 2,000 Indigenous households and more than 40 rural communities across Alberta. The BC port strike is costing the Canadian economy around $500 million a day. Will the Trudeau government issue back-to-work legislation so that Canadian product can get moving again? Political reporter Brian Lilly will give us his thoughts on the topic shortly. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. Explore the exciting and delicious downtown food scene at Foodie Fest on Tuesday, July 25th. Food trucks will gather at Galt Gardens with other amazing opportunities to enjoy the many downtown restaurants with free samples. Plus, select stores will also be open late for shopping. It'll be great fun for everyone. For more information, visit Downtown Lethbridge BRZ Facebook page. Discover a new activity that you love. All are invited to this summer's Give It a Try events, hosted by the Lethbridge Sport Council. It's a great opportunity to try your hand at a new sport like climbing, badminton, handball, and more. Events are free to attend. Register in advance by visiting lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/program/Give It a Try. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The strike at ports across British Columbia are now in their 10th day. Around 7,400 members of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union have been off the job since July the 1st. Talks between the union and the BC Maritime Employers Association resumed, but no deal in sight, at least not just yet. To talk about this walkout in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, the strike is estimated to be costing the Canadian economy around $500 million a day. It's a pretty big deal. Where's the federal government on this, and will we see back-to-work legislation?
Federal government's pretty much AWOL on this, and no, we won't see back-to-work legislation for a couple of reasons I can explain in a minute. But the Canadian Federation of Independent Business has come out demanding that something be done, explaining that this is hurting small businesses across the country. You've got Nutrien, the big potash producer in Saskatchewan. They've now curtailed production because they can't ship it out. This is a vital product for farmers around the world. Potash being a key ingredient in fertilizer. They use the West Coast ports. There are the American retailers are calling on the federal government. An American Retailers Association says you need to recall Parliament and bring in back to work legislation because it's hurting them. So many of the ships are now moving away from either Prince Rupert or the port of Vancouver and heading to American ports. They prefer Canadian ports because they're closer to Asia than the American ports. That means that goods get off the ship quicker and onto trucks, cheaper way of transporting. But this is costing everybody big time. But will we get that back to work legislation? No, for two distinct reasons. One, the Trudeau Liberals don't favor it. Labor Minister Seamus O'Regan has been talking about how, no, we won't go that route, that negotiations are the way. And he has been a big booster of unions in a very, very different way than, say, somebody like Ontario's Doug Ford, who got a lot of union support in the last election. He's been, we're there for labor. We're going to do what's good for you. We're going to do what's good for the union, whereas Ford is all about, we'll get jobs for your guys. So Reagan doesn't like it, Trudeau doesn't like it, but also there was that Supreme Court decision a few years ago that said the right to strike is a charter right. That was never written into the charter. It was never read into the charter. There were decades of precedent previously saying that this was not something that was a charter protected right. And the court invented it. They said its time has come, I believe was the phrase that the justice who wrote that decision used. So you can't use back to work legislation anymore. And the couple of times it has been used since, it has been struck down by courts as unconstitutional. Those battles are still ongoing. So unless Justin Trudeau wants to invoke the notwithstanding clause to bring in back to work legislation, I don't think he'll do it.
So, Brian, if the strike continues for a few more weeks or even months, what kind of long-term damage will this have on the Canadian economy?
Well, I think a big question will be, will those ships that have now started diverting to American ports come back? Right. Some will, some may not. Yes, it's cheaper to go to Canadian ports, but once relationships are established, it can be difficult to break them. So could lose traffic. That means lost jobs for the people who are out on strike. We're talking billions of or hundreds of millions of dollars a day. We're talking about production being shut down at Nutrien. Well, how many other places are going to have to shut down? And what does that mean for suppliers? If you're exporting off the East Coast in Canada, you're probably using an East Coast port, but a lot of the imports that come into this country come in through the port of Vancouver and are then shipped across the country. So whether we're talking supply chain for manufacturers, whether we're talking retailers, all of these outfits are going to be hurt. And the last time that we had a port shut down for this long, we called invoked the Emergencies Act. I'm talking about the Ambassador Bridge. That is a port of entry into Canada as well. That bridge was shut down. Coutts was shut down. The Emergencies Act was invoked. This time, because it's a strike as opposed to a protest, the federal government is AWOL. They are just nowhere to be found. Seamus O'Regan last tweeted about this on July 7th. He's not showing up. You look on the wire services, you look in news stories. He's not a factor in this. That is shameful. That is shameful for the federal government. And Justin Trudeau, of course, is often in NATO not paying attention to this.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about that for a moment here, Brian. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is overseas with an announcement that we're going to be beefing up our military to the tune of $2.6 billion and up to 2,200 troops in Latvia over the next few years. Brian, isn't this the same military which wasn't able to receive helmets from the federal government not long ago in Europe?
Yeah, it is. And the federal government is trying to, given all the pressure from our NATO allies, trying to find new ways to fudge the accounting to say that we are spending more on our military than we are. They're trying to say, well, what really counts as military spending? That's not the way you go about it. We've got a clear definition of military spending. You haven't been meeting that target. You haven't been meeting it in a long time. And one of the few ways that they're looking to do it, they've got this contract going out to Boeing, a sole source contract to bring in new surveillance aircraft for our coastline. And instead of allowing a Canadian company to bid on it, a Canadian company that has suppliers and employees across the country, they're going sole source to Boeing. Why? So that they can say, well, we're increasing our military spending. It's a very bizarre way that the Trudeau government is going about this. They're obviously facing pressure from other countries, and they want to be seen as being important on the world stage. You remember Justin Trudeau campaigned on Canada's back. Well, we have less pull at NATO now than we used to, less pull at the G7, less pull at the UN. And Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly is saying, well, we need to increase our importance on the world stage. Well, maybe you do that by actually being involved and not just making grand pronouncements, which is what the Trudeau government is good at.
Now, Brian, the fallout from the Paul Bernardo transfer controversy continues from the maximum to a medium security prison. Now, deputy ministers are saying they thought Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino actually knew about the transfer.
Yeah, this is shocking. Last week, we got access to information documents through the Canadian press that showed that Commissioner of Corrections Canada, Anne Kelly, had emailed the deputy minister, an associate deputy minister, a guy named Sean Tupper, and a woman named Tricia Geddes. We knew that they had been informed months earlier in March. The transfer took effect at the end of May. Well, through that access to information request, we found out that days before the transfer, Anne Kelly emailed Tupper and Geddes again and said, just confirming, told you I would, the transfer is happening next week. Tupper responded minutes later with an email saying, thank you. So they obviously knew. Why didn't they tell the minister? I think they did. I think there's a lot of games being played here. But a spokesperson for the minister, or deputy minister, said, we had no reason to believe he didn't know. Give me a break. You get an email saying high-profile prisoner transfer in the subject line, and you don't raise it with the minister and say, are we good on this? Are we ready to deal with this when the inevitable fallout happens? I don't believe that didn't happen. And unfortunately, it's just another example of how the Liberal government doesn't treat public safety seriously. It's the same MO that they used on why they didn't do anything about Michael Chong being targeted by China. Well, the minister didn't get the memo. The minister didn't read the memo. Nobody told the minister. Your job is to communicate these things, to read these things. The deputy knew about it. The top political staffers knew about it in both cases. And you're telling me that the minister wasn't informed? It's their job to know, and it's the job of the staffers to inform them. This is too important a department just to let this go. These are the people in charge of our borders, Hal, our prison system, the RCMP, CSIS, preventing terror attacks, and they can't brief the minister? It's either complete incompetence or they're lying to us, and neither one is a good look for a federal minister.
The ongoing fight over Bill C-18 continues, and Brian, it's taken on a bit of a new twist here. As the tech giants say they're moving forward with blocking Canadian news from their platforms, the Trudeau government may be giving in on a key demand from both Google and Meta. What would that be?
That would be unlimited. The way Google phrases it is they call it unlimited financial liability. So Google has been willing to play ball on this more than Meta or Facebook. And they've long said, look, we are interested in funding or contributing to a fund to support Canadian journalism. But what we cannot have is an unlimited financial liability, meaning there's no limit to how much they have to pay. That's been a demand of theirs since before C-18 was passed. It was a demand when C-18 was in discussion phases, when it was at committee, and the government just refused to talk about that. Facebook also wants to see that. They're less willing to play ball, but that is one of their key demands, one of their key problems. And so now the federal government, after ignoring the company's complaints, which is a very reasonable complaint, doesn't matter which side of the C-18 debate you're on. I know some people hate it and think all the media should just die. Others think that the tech giants need to pay. Doesn't matter which side of the bill you're on. You can't have an unlimited bill just showing up to you every year. So this appears to be an attempt by the Trudeau government to say through the regulations they will put a cap on. Is it enough? Well, those of us in the news media have to hope so, because this is a vital part of our future going forward.
Yeah, let's see how this plays out. Brian, many Canadians received their grocery rebate from the federal government, even though the money was welcomed. Many would argue that the payments to 11 million Canadians is a sign of a failure by our government. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, it's a failure. We just hit 40 million people in Canada just before Canada Day. 11 million represents 27.5% of the population. Now, you consider that many of the people who got that check have dependents, they've got spouses, they've got children, they've got others that they're looking after. That means well over 30% of our nation's population needs help buying groceries, buying the most basic item, Hal, food to live on. This is not something that we can do without. It's not a nice to have. We can discuss whether you should get a new car, whether you should have a car at all, but a car is not always a necessity. We can live without a car. Maybe we can't do the things we want, but we can't live without food. And we should all be able to buy food. This government has ignored issues like inflation for a long time. And while she was making the announcement, boasting about these 11 million people getting checks to buy food, Chrystia Freeland was also boasting that, well, inflation's down to 3.4%. Here's the problem. Food inflation, still at 9%. If you're buying staples like cooking oil, that's up 20% over the year before. And of course, the year before, it was up more as well. So prices have increased dramatically and continue to increase dramatically when it comes to food. But here's the other thing, and Sylvain Charlebois, the food professor, has been talking about this. Look at mortgage costs, look at rental costs. Mortgage costs are up 29.9% compared to a year ago. I know you've been dealing with that with your mortgage renewal. I'm talking to so many people in that position over the last couple of months. And that, says Charlebois, is why people are having trouble paying for food. And Justin Trudeau was warned about this during the 2021 election. And we all remember what he said when he was asked about keeping inflation in check. Is that something the Bank of Canada should be doing, or should it be allowed to run higher? He said, "You'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy. I think about families." Well, his failure to think about monetary policy is why so many people need help with food now. And that is a big part of why I say this is a failure. That and 30% of the population shouldn't need assistance from the government to buy food.
Brian, bail reform is back on the agenda following a stabbing in a subway and 2 brazen shootings during the daytime in Toronto. Are the premiers discussing this at their big meeting in Winnipeg?
Well, it's on the agenda now, and Toronto is the media center of the country and gets more attention than it should, many would argue. But these are brazen attacks. I mean, the one woman was a wife and mother of 2 young kids out to pick up some food and do some errands at lunch, and she got shot by drug dealers who had moved into the area due to a safe injection site going in. So they had easy customers. The 3 men get into an argument, bullets start flying, and this woman just walking down the street, minding her own business, is killed. These are the types of things that start moving agendas. Every premier in the country has been calling for bail reform for a long time now. The feds have given it lip service, but so far, no concrete action in terms of actually getting it done. I believe they did bring in a proposed reform just before the House rose, but that's not taking effect yet, and it won't for some time. We need to get moving on this quickly, not slowly.
6 polls from 6 different firms over a month all show that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have the lead in popularity. Now, Brian, is that a trend, a one-off? And what difference will it really make as long as the NDP's Jagmeet Singh is propping up the Trudeau government?
It's definitely showing a trend. I mean, we're talking about 6 polls with a lead of 5 points or more. I think one poll may have had Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives 8 points above Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. There's, still, if you want the Conservatives to win, some cause for concern. As we've talked before, Atlantic Canada firmly in the Liberal camp, Prairies firmly in the Conservative camp. But there is movement in British Columbia. There is movement in Ontario towards Pierre Poilievre. Those are the areas he's got to win. He can't win any more seats in Saskatchewan. He could win 2 more in Alberta, but he's got to win the seats in the Lower Mainland that the Conservatives won consistently under Stephen Harper. He's got to win suburban seats in Ontario that they consistently won under Stephen Harper that have gone to the Liberals. He's got to bring those swing voters back. As I keep saying, primarily we're talking about mothers, women, but more specifically mothers with kids at home. Those are the people he's got to talk about. That's why I talk so much about the cost of living, the cost of your house going up, the cost of your food, the food on your table going up. Those are issues that will be winners for him. I think these are all good signs for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you.
You know, here in southern Alberta, we feel the impact of decisions that seem to be made with Toronto or Ottawa in mind, and they don't always appear to be in the best interests of Albertans. There are policy groups across our country working to improve life for all Canadians through research and the communication of sound policy ideas. Joining me to talk more about his recent visit to Lethbridge is Michael Van Pelt. He's the president and CEO of Cardis. Mr. Van Pelt, welcome to Bridge City News.
Hey, thank you. It's a great place that you're in. Love being in Lethbridge. Love being in Medicine Hat. Been in 10 cities across Alberta over the last 2 weeks. What a great time.
Well, we're glad that you could visit us in our wonderful neck of the province here, Michael. But can you just give us an idea of what is the focus of Cardis?
So Cardis is in some ways a very traditional think tank in Canada. We focus on public policy issues. We focus on research to advance those public policy issues, help educate a larger population about what the kind of main and central issues that we're facing here in public life. And that could range on childcare issues. It could range on gambling issues. It could deal with religious freedom issues. There's just multiple issues that governments are responsible and that a larger public square is responsible. And we're in those spaces and contributing to that public dialogue and helping people to kind of shift their thinking or be more clarified about their thinking. That's what a think tank does. We're interesting as well because we're faith-based. We come out of a religious tradition. The basic idea is that in our case, the Christian tradition actually does have something to offer public life today that can be done in a very flourishing way. That's Cardis in a nutshell.
So what led you to the mission of Cardis, and how did you get started with the organization?
So ironically, I'm actually its first full-time employee. We're about 22 years old. And the history of think tanks in Canada is a little bit different. So in the United States, the think tank tradition is very, very strong. It's very, very deeply embedded into the kind of public and political dialogue. Government leaders, municipal leaders, the public service are very much reliant on the research and the public opinion of many, many players in the think tank space. In Canada, that is actually a less popular kind of way of engaging the public environment. That's changing now. So you've seen a rise of many, many think tanks in Canada. We're part of that overall development. And it's really, really interesting. What I love about it is here is a charitable organization called Cardis, which is funded not at all by governments, which is funded by an interested population that says, we've got ideas about how the public square can improve, can do better than it is today. And your job, Michael, is to kind of put that into good order, do good research, make sure you've got good backing on your ideas, and then advance them into a public square. And that could be to government leaders, that could be to business leaders, that could be to civil society leaders and organizational leaders. That's really that kind of unique space that a think tank is in today. We're not the aggressive, angry lobbyists. We're not the academic institution that sits in, let's say, the stereotypical ivory tower. We're in that day-to-day messy business with ideas that actually matter to people.
So with all the research you do and the information you gather, who do you see as the demographic that Cardis speaks to?
So essentially, Cardis communicates with those kind of leaders in society that have the ability to, as it were, move an idea to the next stage. So think about in Lethbridge, think about your mayor, think about municipal leaders, think about business leaders who, when they are concerned about something, that needs to be paid attention to, whether we kind of like it or not. Think about many of your Chamber of Commerce leaders or other civil society leaders or social service leaders. These are people who have been given the responsibility to provide leadership in a community. And how do we help them exercise that leadership? That means that we need to do really, really good research, that they've got tools and backing to know how to suggest good improvements. That's really the kind of market that we're kind of targeted to as a think tank, in some ways really no different than most think tanks in Canada.
So when you were in Lethbridge, can you just tell us what the discussion was all about?
So this is, I love this because this is a really kind of interesting engagement that we are in. And Lethbridge was one of 10 cities that we are wanting to advance this particular idea. Cardis has long been one of the leading think tanks looking at educational choice in Canada and educational reform in Canada. And essentially we were making the argument that it is now time for the business sector and business leaders to pay a lot more attention to the quality of K-12 education. Remember, we've just come out of a COVID period. Families and parents have been able to kind of have a little look under the hood of kind of what our education system is looking like. There's a little bit of an unease about that. Business leaders, they're looking for a certain kind of employee, and they're struggling with that. And when we were researching this area, we were saying there's a bit of a disconnect. So you as a business leader wake up in the morning and what kind of skills are you concerned about? Yes, you're concerned about a labor shortage in Canada, but you're also concerned about a skills shortage. Okay, what is that skill shortage? Here's what it is. It's numeracy rates. It is literacy rates. It is soft skills. It is emotional capacity. It is relational dynamics. It is coming to work on time. It's being able to deal with stress environments in intense workspaces, retail, service sectors, all of those kind of things. When you actually think about those skills, those are not skills that you learn in a post-secondary environment. Those are skills that you are being taught, and behaviors and character that is developing really in a K-12 environment. And we're saying, business leaders, you need to pay attention to that, because yes, you're really concerned about that. We get that. But the kind of technical skills that may be taught out of college or employment transition funding from a federal government, that's not going to get at this answer. The way you will get at this answer is actually focusing your concerns and challenging K-12 education to up their game, to perform at a higher level and help build some of those missing skills that employers are thinking about. So that's the one argument that we were making as we traveled across Alberta. But the second argument that we were making, let's say we come to an agreement that this is a concern, this is a real concern. How do we actually solve that problem? And here's where Cardis was advancing the idea that if you really want to solve that problem, you can't just rely on big systems to do so. You can't just rely on a very large government system here as Alberta education is largely. You need educational choice. You need innovation. You need options. And as we grow those options to a larger piece of the overall sector, as we grow enrollment in that educational choice space, that is going to have the benefit of improving the whole sector. So that was essentially our two-piece argument. Number one, there's certain skills that you need and they happen in K-12. Let's start paying attention to that. If you really want to make serious improvement, number two, in the education system, you're going to need to build a larger sector of educational choice options that's going to challenge the whole sector to improve. That's what we were in Lethbridge for.
Now, on your website, you are upfront about being Christian. Why do you think this matters in what you do?
The Christian tradition is actually a really creative tradition. It doesn't just speak about what, let's say, your and my kind of spiritual commitments are internally. It actually has a vision for kind of all of life. So when you had the very idea of love God and love your neighbor, well, what does it actually mean to love your neighbor? It means that you need to care for them. You need to work hard to create environments where they too can flourish, not just your own flourishing. So when I think about this idea of loving your neighbor, I immediately connect it to how do we think about building a flourishing public life together? Let's remember, not everyone is committed to a religious kind of commitment. Some people have no religious commitments at all, or they have, let's say, a secular religious commitment. There's multiple religious communities. How do we actually live together kind of in common, having a common life together, but recognizing those kind of diversities? And the history of Christianity has actually very positively developed a way of living together in that way that can be flourishing, where you actually can love your neighbor as yourself. Even in business, the very expression of business is, Naveen, how can I serve you with a need that you have? Mm-hmm. When you think about that, that's not actually a motive for profit. That is a motive for service. So even at a business level, the primary interest is what I would call nearly a religious impulse. How do I love my neighbor as myself? And the way I do that is when Naveen has a need, I can help you. How can I serve you? Just even think about the language. So that was just an illustration about how connected our religious commitment is to the day-to-day life of public life and how flourishing that can be.
And many religious groups have schools to educate their children, so that obviously, like, there is some choice. Can you talk about your opinion on choice in education? Like, should we have choice, or like, should education be one size fits all?
Great question. Let's look at a little bit of the data in Alberta. That will help us. So right now, basically, you have about approximately 10.5% of the school enrollment in Alberta that is represented in what I call independent school environments. Those are non-government school environments. So they could include faith-based schools, they could include charter schools, they could include, let's say, a Montessori school, they could include some of the elite schools, or they could include homeschooling. The rest, the 89.5%, really is made up of 3 government-run systems: the public system, the Catholic system, and the Francophone system. And what I'm kind of arguing is that 10.5 probably in Alberta should grow to kind of 25% of overall enrollment. But yes, inside of those independent schools, that educational choice space gives opportunity not just for religious communities to educate as they see consistent with their religious tradition. That's been thankfully a longstanding privilege in Alberta, but that can also grow into specific curricular kind of interests or pedagogical approaches. Just for example, the rise of STEM here in Alberta. You've seen a number of the charter schools being focused on science, technology, engineering, and math as a priority in their education system. So it's not just the religious diversity that we want to respect. We do want to do that, and we want to encourage that. That is actually a good, not a negative. But there are many other ways of educating. And in an environment where the world is changing so fast, we need innovation and creativity in how we educate. And our argument is, let the parents actually kind of generate that and kind of animate it and see where that goes.
So you feel that competition in education won't necessarily decrease the quality of public education. Would it perhaps improve it?
You use the word competition, and let's go for that. But let's remember that's a bit of an economic term. I would actually go just diverse options. When you have diversity and people can see many different ways of doing things, that can animate improvement elsewhere. So I'll give you an example. When you saw in Alberta the first kind of conversations around charter schools, thinking about how to do STEM in a different way in a K-12 environment, that prompted a whole other discussion among some of the government schools about how they could actually deliver those goods as well. And I go, bingo, that's wonderful. That's where you have a situation where a smaller body was doing something really, really creative, and it was duplicated in larger environments. Big systems have harder times doing innovative things. The same is in business. When you have really big companies, they oftentimes they don't have the kind of nimble character of smaller, kind of more innovative companies. Same principle here. So I think it's actually a good, and many people are concerned that if you grow a independent sector or an educational choice, it is going to kind of challenge the larger government system. Actually, the reverse is true.
Oh.
And we need to start thinking about that and not be fearful of it. So don't blow up the system. We're not interested in kind of taking an American kind of angry, blow up the system approach. Not at all. What we need to do is an incremental approach here that just gives a little bit more diversity. We're saying somewhere 20-25% of enrollment, and then just see how innovation flourishes, see how choice flourishes, see how parents think about the options provided them, and it's going to be a good thing.
We're almost out of time, but I really want to squeeze in this one last question because I feel it's very important. What would you say to parents questioning what their children are being taught in local schools and around the country?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's obviously a very challenging and in some ways a poignant question today. My approach is, do we want to fight about, do we want to debate all of these issues, or do we want to allow diversity to happen? My default would be is in the end, the parent, the family has got the initial and the primary impetus to take responsibility for this kind of education. And you will, when you have no choice, when you have no options, you are going to create environments for bitterness, for disagreement, for conflict. Why do we need to do that? Why can't we just open up a little bit more educational options and allow those differences to live together? They can. History shows us that's possible. So I'm actually not going to buy into even the premise. I'm saying I'm not interested in having those debates and having those dialogues. I think we can create a common good together by giving families a diversity of choice that they can raise and educate their kids in a public space together, but within their own kind of educational commitments. That would solve a lot of the problem that we're seeing, kind of creating these undue kind of bitterness spaces that we're kind of dealing with today. We don't need to have that happen.
Well, we're out of time for today, Michael, but thank you so much for joining us for this interview.
Just a delight to meet you. And hey, great place to be in Lethbridge. Thanks so much for hosting me there.
Absolutely awesome. That was Michael Van Pelt, President and CEO of Cardus. He joined us from his office in Hamilton. I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.